Hello from St. Lucia to the Caribbean and the world. I'm Ulbuski, welcoming you on International Day for Indigenous People, a day designated by the United Nations. And our panel discussion today comes to you on behalf of the Cultural Development Foundation and the National Reparations Committee in honor of the importance of recognizing, understanding, and appreciating the history and the role of the region's first people within the context of the Caribbean, but first people the world over. And by first people, we mean the first people who we might sometimes describe as the first inhabitants, the natives, the Amerindians, but that is subject to correction, as we will find out later today. We have a very good panel for you today, to put it lightly. And with us today is Chief Hernandez, who is the chair of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous People, COIP, and he's joining us out of Trinidad and Tobago. Also with us is Honorable Frederick Cozier. Honorable Cozier Frederick. He's the Minister of Kalinago Affairs in Dominica. Waiti Kubuli is the name he prefers to refer to it as, and he will explain why when he joins us. Also with us in-house is Ambassador June Soomer, the CARICOM representative on the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And in-house with us as well is Mr. Laura Jomo Jean-Pierre, a researcher who certainly St. Lucians know quite a lot about our first people from, on the basis of his continued advocacy for us to do more to appreciate the fact that, as with everywhere else, St. Lucia had first people. And we are with you through the NTN Studios, National Television Network in St. Lucia. And of course, like I said, it is International Day for Indigenous People across the region. And why such a day? We will hear more about that from our first contribution, which will be coming from the United Nations itself. But we might also point out that the theme for today is why reparations for Native genocide. And the reason for the theme is to put the issue of Native genocide in perspective within the general context of reparations. As we know, 10 years ago, the Caribbean community, the governments of CARICOM, called for reparations for slavery and Native genocide. 10 years later, unfortunately but understandably, there has been more emphasis on reparations for slavery than on explaining why reparations also for Native genocide. So from the standpoint that reparations has been generally accepted halfway as being reparations for slavery, today, by the end of today's session, we would want you to better understand, hopefully, why reparations for Native genocide has to be treated with equal measure in the context of the general demand for reparations by CARICOM, because Native genocide preceded slavery, and we will be hearing much more about that from our respective contributors today. So to start us off, we will go with the following video issued by the UNESCO today, the United Nations, responsible for ensuring that the International Day for Indigenous People is observed by all member nations. And in that respect, we now join the advisor to the UN Secretary General on racism. And here she encourages us to better understand why today, the 9th of August, every year is International Day for Indigenous People.
Today, the 9th of August 2023, we recognize as part of the United Nations family the World's Indigenous Peoples Day. This year's theme, which talks about indigenous youth as agents of change for self-determination, speaks directly to young people who need to take pride in the fact that they are the indigenous people of each and every country. We, the anti-racism team, wish to join the people of the world in saying, young people, claim your heritage. Today, we are saying to young indigenous people, take your place, claim your place at the forefront of change in the countries in which you were born.
We recognize that there cannot be climate justice without human rights and indigenous people's rights.
Indigenous people, young people should know that the indigenous communities have been victims of racism in many countries. And it is time that we get behind that. We urge young people to engage with the United Nations to ensure that indigenous people are not marginalized and left out of development in their own countries. We urge the United Nations family from the anti-racism team that let us all unite to ensure that we put a stop to the marginalization of indigenous people. In particular, we urge young indigenous people to take control of their own destiny.
Yes, folks, we've heard it from the advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on issues dealing with racism. And as she pointed out, the theme today is Indigenous Youth and the Struggle for Self-Determination. And as I said in an article that I wrote today, which is published around the region, not all CARICOM member states will have entities of organized youth who are from indigenous communities and therefore struggling to ensure that their community is recognized by the rest of the community at home. But that being so, International Youth Day is 3 days away every year. August 9th, International Day for Indigenous People. August 12th, International Youth Day. And whether it was meant to be or not, the situation is that there is a 3-day difference between those 2 days, and today's theme links that gap by providing the opportunity for young people in 2023, be they indigenous or not, they would also be youth and students in their countries. And we are hoping that youth and students in St. Lucia, across the region, across the world, who are with us on this program or participating in other related programs would, by the end of the day, be in a better position to understand why the theme applies not only to indigenous youth, but to youth and students across the Caribbean and the world. That being said, we will go to our first presenter, Chief Ricardo, Hernandez is the head of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples, COIP, and it was established many years ago. He will tell us whether it was 1987 or 1997. But the COIP is based in Trinidad with a secretariat. It comprises representation from several member states of the Caribbean, and he will explain that as well. But Chief Hernandez, as we would imagine, has been quite busy today, not only in Santa Rosa, the community where he resides and operates from in Trinidad and Tobago, but as the chief for the spread of Caribbean Indigenous peoples organizations. It is my pleasure to introduce and invite Chief Ricardo Hernandez. Chief, the floor is yours.
Convener of this panel, the Honorable Cozier Frederick, Minister of Kalinago Affairs of Dominica, other distinguished members of the panel. I greet you all with the Lokono greeting, Sato Rikan, Sato Kasakabo. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege for me to be invited to speak in this setting on this very important day, the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. As the convener, the chair for today's proceeding indicated, earlier today we had virtual coming together of members of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples, facilitated by the Caribbean Policy Development Center. And this came out of discussions that we had earlier this year in St. Lucia, where the Caribbean Development Bank met for their annual meeting, the bank's annual meeting, and a special forum was designated for the indigenous peoples to focus on indigenous peoples. It was at that meeting that we decided that we should use the opportunity today for the first time to connect with all the members of our organization and giving them an opportunity to share the activities that they had in their respective communities for this day as they observe the International Day, and also in an effort to bring the concerns of the First Peoples or the indigenous peoples to a wider cross-section of our national community and people of the region. So our topic of discussion, why reparations for Native genocide, is both an interesting and timely question. As we all could recall from our history, the brutal onslaught on the indigenous peoples at the time of the conquest and the awakening of conscience on human rights issues led to the first meeting on the 9th of August 1982 of the UN's Working Group on Indigenous Peoples. And it is solely because of the UN's recognition of the atrocities that was meted out to the First Peoples by the colonizers, and the years of discussion that the United Nations came up with a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. And that declaration, which I know that all of us are most familiar with, speaks to so many issues, and there are so many articles referring to the issues of First Peoples. And one of the things that the declaration speaks to is in Article 28. It is that there should be redress for indigenous peoples, for First Peoples, because of the, as I said, the atrocities against them by the colonizers. And Article 28 of the declaration states that indigenous peoples have the right to redress by means that can include restitution, or when this is not possible, just fair, and equitable compensation for the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned or otherwise occupied or used, and which have been confiscated, taken, occupied, used, or damaged without their free, prior, and informed consent. So this is just one example of that declaration speaking to the issue of reparations and why reparations for Native genocide. I don't want to go into all the declaration because I said we are familiar with it. It's nothing new, but successive governments, and I'm speaking based on my experience here in Trinidad and Tobago, successive governments have attempted to address the concerns of our indigenous peoples in little ways, in token ways I refer to. They are not taking this declaration seriously. While most countries signed on to this declaration, and while this declaration is not binding on any government, but it is to be used as a guide or a blueprint to address the concerns and the needs of indigenous peoples, sometimes you get the feeling that they are not serious. And I say that not knocking them, but I feel it is out of caution and probably fear by the respective governments that they are not taking this document seriously in terms of ratifying it, bringing it into their national laws, and so because of fear that the demands probably, certainly in certain countries, might be too much for governments to handle. I believe this is the basis of this. But notwithstanding that, we continue to talk about equity. In Trinidad, our national anthem says every creed and race finds an equal place. And for a long time, I had problems singing or saying that verse. Because when you look at it really, there's no that equity that it speaks about is not there. I will give you an example. Every ethnicity in Trinidad and Tobago, except the First Peoples, enjoy national holidays. Enjoy national holidays. And we agitated a few years ago for a one-off public holiday. And we agitated for that because I felt it was easier for the government to consider a one-off rather than add another permanent holiday to the long list that already exists. And so said, so done. We got it in a quick space of time, that one-off. But when I look at what COVID had done to the world, not only to indigenous peoples and to one area, but to the world, cripple economies, that we are still struggling in many ways to come out of that. I said to myself, you know what? Another holiday in this country cannot do the damage to the country as COVID did to us. And it is not just asking for a holiday for a holiday's sake, but when the other ethnicities enjoy their holidays, they have the attention of the government, ministers, who you want to be at your events, to listen to your plight, to listen to what you're doing, to see in what ways they can advance your cause. And in the absence of a holiday, we don't have that. Those who have the holidays enjoy those benefits. When we want schools to participate in the culture and in the traditions, we don't have it because we don't have a holiday. They're at school. And people generally do not really take that on because they have to be about their business, their work, and so on. So that is why it is important to have a national day so that we can focus, if we are serious, on our First Peoples and their needs and looking at ways of how we can ensure the preservation of that culture and heritage. Now, certain countries, there are similarities in the region across the board with indigenous peoples, but there are differences. For example, in Dominica, you have a reserve. So it is easier in that way to administer certain things to your indigenous peoples. In Trinidad and Tobago, we lost that under the British. When our territory, when our area as a mission was established, it was established in the 1750s with 1,300 20 acres of land for the Indigenous mission village. Under the British, we lost every inch of it. Every inch was taken away. That is an injustice. Today, because of the information, because of all that is happening, reparations in the air, that is a cause. That is a need for reparations for Native genocide. And I can speak because it is in our jurisdiction, so I can speak to it. But I imagine there are similar situations in other regions. So that is a great cause for reparations. If the indigenous peoples are to retain their sovereignty, their position, have their equal place in the land, that is a very important issue, land rights. And it needs to be addressed. So that is one area we can see why we must have reparations for the native peoples. So in a nutshell, this is what I want to say. I will be open for questions. I don't want to take too much time. I want to give other people to speak. I can add. But before I close, I want to say that we are asking in Trinidad for a place at local government in our various municipalities, a voice. And we are asking for an independent voice, not a partisan voice, because that has consequences later on. We don't have time to go into that. But an independent voice to be at the table, both at the local level and probably in later years at the national level. Dominica enjoys that. And the Honorable Minister is there, can attest to that. And that is so because your situation was slightly different in that you had your treaty and was able to retain that demarcation, that space that enable you that the council that operates there is solely from your indigenous community. Your chief comes from there. Trinidad does not have that kind of arrangement. So then we have to look at ways and means where we can include our indigenous peoples in that framework. And so we feel the best way to do it is by having an independent voice at local government. We are now talking about local government reform. Our local government elections is just a few days away. But reform must not only be to suit the government at the time what they see is reform and is important. They must go further to listen to the voice of our indigenous peoples and to other peoples with similar concerns. We have made our supplication to various consultations. And some people seem to believe that if the government bends to or accedes to a request like that, they are making one group, they are elevating one group above other groups. And that is not so. They are not seeing it in the right context. The right context is, and as the United Nations said, that indigenous peoples have a unique and inherent right to the lands of their ancestors. And that is the difference. It is not that these steps will make you more important than other ethnicities or give you more privilege, but it is recognizing that place of uniqueness and the inherent rights as indigenous to the land. Recently at CARICOM in Trinidad, when the CARICOM leaders met to celebrate the
50th anniversary
of the 50th anniversary, I love the Prime Minister of Dominica and what he had to say. He's the current chair of CARICOM, that the Parliament make laws. And as far as he's concerned, I hope I'm quoting him right, that there isn't anything that they cannot change except the 10 Commandments. You will not touch the 10 Commandments, but you can change other things through laws to make the people, empower the people for their own advancement. And that is what it is about. And once you have the political will to do it, things like these could be achieved. I think I want to rest here for now. There's so much more to talk about and to say and to explore, but I would like to hear from the others on the panel, and then we can also add some contributions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Chief Ricardo Hernandez, the coordinating chief of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous People. And as he indicated, we also have online Honorable Cozier Frederick, the Minister for Kalinago Affairs in Dominica. And it is important that, untimely, that he comes on just after Chief Hernandez. So welcome, Minister Cozier.
Thank you very much, Bosque, and I really want to thank you for organizing this event. I know you've been chairing the Reparations Committee in St. Lucia for some time, and it's good work. This work has to continue. I would also like to say Mabrika to Chief Ricardo Hernandez, Mabrika from Dominica. I happen to be in Barbados now. I've been traveling doing some work. I happen to be traveling my Prime Minister on a very important mission, and I made it very clear to him I need an hour at least to sit and have that conversation with you wonderful people. So I just want to thank you for the courtesies that he afforded me on our mission to join this panel today. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Soomer. I think we met some time ago in Dominica, and we had some conversation here, and also Laura Jean-Pierre, the archaeologist. So what I want to focus on this afternoon, comrades and friends, is the importance of youth and their understanding of what reparations mean. In the normal definition, it basically speaks to measures to redress violations of human rights, and in so doing, we're hoping to provide a range of sometimes symbolic benefits to the victims of that injustice. So that, in a sense, is what reparation is. The youth is important; it's an important part of that mission. So on Dominica, for instance, we have a National Youth Council by law. And in its constitution, it dedicates a position for Kalinago youth to be represented at that level. So while we're doing the movement at the political level, we also realize the importance of the youth, and so the youth has a voice. And so I really want to shed some light on what I believe to be the critical matter that transcends both time and space, and it echoes throughout history. And that I believe is the significance of indigenous reparations to our younger generation. It appears that right across the world we have struggled with injustices faced by our indigenous communities, and I believe it is our duty to first acknowledge, address, and to rectify those wrongs. It's so important. So the big question is, why is that really important to youth? And I believe that first and foremost, that the need for reparations sort of fosters an understanding of the past, and therefore it commits us to do more for a just future. And so, comrades, I believe that learning about the historical injustices inflicted upon our people, the youth can gain some insights to the roots of inequality that exist, and also even the prejudices that exist even today. That's why I think it's so important. Furthermore, I believe that supporting indigenous reparations it embodies empathy and solidarity, and so it is very, very important that we have this understanding. I also believe to a very large extent that understanding this reparation movement teaches our young generation to appreciate the richness of our culture and our cultural diversity, and also to have them respect the rights of those voices who have been silenced for way too long. And so by standing up for the rights of indigenous communities across the region, across the Western Hemisphere, the youth can set an example of compassion. It can also help build a world that values and celebrates the unique contributions of every culture across the globe. So comrades, I also believe that the indigenous reparations really contribute to what can be termed healing and reconciliation. And so, by addressing the historical traumas inflicted upon indigenous peoples, we really do provide a platform for healing the wounds that have persisted for many, many generations. This healing process, I believe, is very essential to restoring one, dignity, also pride and self-esteem within all our indigenous communities. And this, I believe, will also allow the youth to witness the power of acknowledging and finally addressing those past wrongs. But perhaps the most important point is for supporting indigenous reparations, it really equips the youth with the tools to be proactive agents of change, especially in the era of technology. And so I also believe it nurtures critical thinking, empathy, and a sense of responsibility in them. So it's not just those who came before, not just us who are activists as we speak, but also they also have responsibility as the new generation. I also want to suggest that by participating in the efforts to rectify those historical injustices, the youth can learn to have the power and to shape and to have a more equitable world that they can exist in for themselves. So comrades, I really think that it is important that we continue to push the reparations movement, and I believe that the involvement of the youth cannot be overstated. It has to be a call to arms, as we would say. And so really it's a call to action, because it's a journey towards one, understanding, and also having empathy and a sense of justice. I believe that by supporting these efforts, we empower youth to become leaders who I believe can carry the torch of justice and equality well into the future. And so I'm very optimistic. I am very optimistic that the work that we have started here as intellectuals, as activists, as cultural leaders can go well into the future if we equip the youth and we provide them the opportunities to participate in that conversation. So I really think within the generation, within the gaps that we have existing, that we have to unite in that cause. Just working hand in hand, working across the region and sharing knowledge is important as we really pave a way for a better future for our youth. And so it is important, Chief Ricardo, that we continue to work. It's hard work. It's tough work to get people to understand the importance of the culture, to understand the importance of our heritage. And I'm very delighted to speak on behalf of Dominica, where we have done much to acknowledge the importance of the Kainango heritage to our country. And so more than ever, on many occasions I have had the opportunity to hear our Prime Minister speaks to his affinity in no uncertain terms. And so I'm very honored to see it. And I see that we do have a model in Dominica that we can share with Trinidad and Tobago, for instance. And like Chief said, we need the political will. It has to be a movement that empowers people. It has to move beyond the myopia view of political parties. It has to be a conscious movement to integrate aspects of that significant heritage into our Caribbean civilization. And so it's just a fact that we did at one point, Chief, covering the entire archipelago, which is wrongly called the Caribbean, which I would like to suggest maybe recall to be the Kainango Island civilization, we could say that, as a positive way moving forward. We want to consider simple things like name changes. I am for sure on the island pushing for a change from Dominica to Waiti Kubuli. The Waiti Kubuli in Kainango language means tall and rugged is a body. That's the ruggedness of Dominica. And we know that Dominica is named after Sunday, when the island was spotted from a distance. And you could well imagine what the name would be like if it was identified or seen on a Tuesday or Wednesday or a Thursday. And so what stands today as fact is that it's rugged and powerful. So White Kubu itself is really truly the name that I believe should stand in Dominica. We are making strides. It's a part of a legacy that began many movies with former chiefs and councillors dating back to the 1930s. And so I'm really happy that we can continue that movement. I'm really happy that the ideals of our civilization has to be shared with youth, who I believe, Chief and comrades on this call here, who I believe are motivated and they are well equipped with modern technology, with access to various social media platforms. They are more than ever equipped to continue the work that we have started. Like Chief, I want to pause for some time, and I'm happy to answer a few questions, make some more comments, but I'm really happy to share this platform with you folks, and especially as we celebrate our indigenousness and our cultural diversity, that I think adds a lot to humanity. Because especially with climate change, we have a lot of models within our society, within our indigenous communities that we can use to combat. Because, Chief, as we know it, we call it modeling. Basically, it means that we will make sure it is not for us to own, but it's for us to use wisely. And we know for a fact that climate change began when the first Europeans set foot in our space. That's where it all began. So sometimes when the conversation becomes loud in the corner of those who came, they can sometimes be very condescending in their approach to us and how they speak to us. But yet, like reparations, they have to admit that they were the ones who actually started this entire global change. And so they must give a commitment. They must continue to address and give some form of redress to what's happening in our present time. And we are moving this year to COP in Dubai. The committee of partners looking at climate change at the global level, and it's important that we also at the CARICOM level, OECS level, in the region, have a voice. I'm hoping to present at that gathering, and hoping to tie it nicely with the reparation cause, which is so crucial for us. So thank you so much, folks, and thank you, Masters of Ceremony, for having this, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation. Ayahura.
Thank you, Honorable Cozier, Frederick, and just a little bit about Honorable Cozier Frederick. He was a graduate of the University of the West Indies on a special Indigenous scholarship that had been arranged at the request of Sir Arthur Lewis way back when he was the head of the University of the West Indies, and that was reactivated by the current head of the University of the West Indies. And as we speak, there exists an arrangement for indigenous people to be able to get scholarships by virtue of being indigenous persons, to carry their culture and everything else to the universities. I remember Sir Hilary Beckles explaining not too long ago about exchanges at the Cavell campus between the students from other CARICOM islands and Barbados, and students from Dominica's indigenous community. And of course, it was the very first time in Caribbean history that you was having that sort of encounter at a university level, and we're talking about the 21st century. So we can see that there is quite a lot to be done, but quite a lot has also been achieved when we listen to the contributions of Chief Hernandez and Minister Cozier. What we have had so far are glimpses of the state of the indigenous struggle in Trinidad and Tobago, and now from Dominica. We come to St. Lucia, where we will join Mr. Jomo Jean-Pierre, who will be giving us the St. Lucia angle from the standpoint that we do not have an active indigenous peoples entity in St. Lucia, but nonetheless there is increasing evidence of the historical fact that there were indigenous people in St. Lucia, and Jomo will tell us more about where St. Lucia's indigenous people are turning up today in 2023. Jomo.
Thanks for your kind introduction, brother. Let me just shift the geography of reason to look at endangered knowledge. And that's what I'll focus on this afternoon in terms of my contribution to the discourse. The body of knowledge that's endangered, that came out of the lived experience of the indigenous people who first occupied these islands. And by and large, we are piggybacking on that body of knowledge unknowingly. But this body of knowledge is an endangered body of knowledge that we need to guard and develop in the 21st century. By that I mean, as a ethnobotanist, my life work has been to study the use of plants in our everyday lives, from the simple to the sublime. Those used in religion, for healing, for food, for clothing, for shelter, all of these areas of our lives. And that body of knowledge is an endangered body of knowledge. And because of the demise of the indigenous people and the colonization scheme, or whatever how we want to call it, we have been robbed by and large of a body of knowledge that has served us well and is still serving us well. For example, we have cases where malaria fever, medicinally, malaria fever during the Second World War, there were periods where soldiers were dying and they couldn't find a cure because you couldn't get ships coming in to bring in goodies, just like when we had COVID and they were bombing boats in the harbor, in the Contata and so forth. As we know, we have found remnants of these boats in this recent time, and so they could not get goodies, and the soldiers were dying. So they had to revert to traditional knowledge. We went in and asked the people, what do you all use for malaria or when mosquitoes bite you? And they said, well, we have something they call China. Where do we find it? So they had to get indigenous knowledge to take the people to the forest, get what we call the China cinchona bark, which was worth its weight in gold during the time of the exploitation in Central and South America. We had that, not the exact species here, but an exostema. Ours is endemic to St. Lucia. It's called Exostema Santa Lucia. But there was another exostema in the bigger countries in the Americas that they use this same plant in the same genus, different species, because ours is endemic, in order to save the troops from malaria. And we did the same thing. And in fact, when they did the biochemistry of these plants, they found that the biochemistry matched each other. So So we have examples of how that traditional knowledge have saved lives. That body of knowledge was so important for our survival in this part of the world, the indigenous people and even those who came after. And that's just one example. And that body of knowledge, the artisans, the musicians, the things they created out of their own environment, and that body of knowledge is dying. Even the building of the dugout canoe that we went to fish with, all of these arts and craft that we take for granted. For example, you have a conch shell that we still use to call when a fisherman comes out to sell his fish or to say there is fish in the bay. We still use it. We use it to call meetings sometimes in some societies. All of that body of knowledge, that custom came out of the Aboriginal people. And we flutes made from even those in this one came out of North America, the Aboriginal people of North America. But we have ours out of bamboo, the plants that are in our own environment, and so forth and so forth. So in music, in communication, in so many different ways, we have a rich body of knowledge that is endangered. And we need to revisit that body of knowledge because it serves us well, especially in times of crisis. It's part of our biocultural heritage. Things like if you cannot get toothpaste to come in times of wars or in times of like COVID, as I said before. We need to know where do you get dentifrice, natural dentifrice to protect our teeth. Things like guanya lopalodes, which is called locally as chew stick, scientifically proven to be efficacious, to be good for the teeth as a dentifrice. So these are the body of knowledge we should guard and work with, because in time to come, and we've seen it happen in our own lived experience during COVID, and I want to go back to that. Nothing was coming in, and we had to revert and go back to our medicine and our food and our way of life in order to survive in these difficult periods. So these are important things. And the amazing thing about this, we had even artisans who created tools out of the elements, from the conch to the stone. And I have examples there. Look at this beautiful artifact made from our origin. This is an authentic artifact found around the coastlines in St. Lucia. Near the beaches and coastlines, all over the coastlines, from Debarra to Granans to Louvet, all of in these areas, these enclaves, you find these artifacts still lying, sometimes on the surface. You don't have to dig for them. Still today in the 21st century. And they are beautiful pieces, brother and sister. Beautiful pieces. These are still in mint condition. Look at the quality of the rocks, the colors, the craftsman or womanship or personship in all of these beautiful pieces that we have put. That was a civilization that was on the move, living with the elements, things that are biodegradable and working out of what we have in our immediate environment. So the point I'm trying to make, that body of knowledge is still valuable even in the 21st century in all the science and technology. Stone axes, what we call the PLY, these are still part of our cultural heritage. And so we need to harness that body of knowledge because it is important. It's part of our heritage as a people. So in so many ways, our plant life, our medicines, our tools, our shampoos, natural shampoos, all of that is in our flora and fauna. And we could use these things not just in times of crisis, but we could do research and it could economic plans. It can become, it could create economy for us if we do it well. We have the laboratories now, and that is where we are going with it as a TRAMIL. It's an organization in the entire Caribbean and Latin America that we've come together as botanists and ethnobotanists and biochemists, researching that body of knowledge, putting it more or less in simple terms into under the microscope, and beginning to analyze it and look at it. And we have found a lot of these medicines to be efficacious for the cases that they were made for, or they were alleged to have been, and we have found them efficacious. And even today, we have things like Shini-12, and we have all of these other medicines that we took for granted, and we threw it out of the window when we got modern medicine. And I'm not making a case to say, well, modern medicine is not either or. It's a marriage of the two, a synthesis of the two. We need both, and there's so much more to say, but I will rest my case. But the point I'm making is, we have a body of knowledge that is endangered, and we must research it. We need to get deeper into our biocultural heritage and look at what we have. Don't poo-poo it. In fact, I think the future is to have medicinal gardens in every hospital on the ground, properly labeled, their names, their local names. If it's Gopompo, it's there with the scientific name, Nilonoptis nepitifolia. When a patient come in and say, doctor, I was drinking Gopompo, he goes into his computer, because the data would be there, the biochemistry data would be there. So he opens his computer, we take one of the leaves or a branch and say, Madam Monsieur, was that what you say? We doctor, yes doctor, that's what I was using. So you authenticate that the patient was using that medicine, you look at the biochemistry, and then you're better able to have a doctor-patient relationship, because you're pregnant with the information on both sides of the scientific divide, so to speak. So this is what I think the future holds for us in the Caribbean. Our medicines, our way of life is important, and we should cherish it, we should research it, we should bring it, we should write about it, we should investigate it, put it under the microscope, and we are getting good results, even now, in the research that we are doing for the past 30 years or more. And the research continues, and we're hoping that our Western trained doctors, they no longer poo-poo in medicinal plants. I don't know that is not in the, but now people are coming to terms with the importance of that body of knowledge that our ancestors left for us. I say our wishes for us. It's riches what they've left us. And we need to continue. Now we have modern science and technology. Put it under the microscope, and let's work together with that body of knowledge and with the scientific community.
An appeal to rescue endangered knowledge from Laura Jomo Jean-Pierre, researcher, ethnobotanist, etc., in St. Lucia. And from our first three speakers, we've had glimpses of the current situation in Trinidad, Dominica, St. Lucia, with a global appeal for rescuing and saving endangered knowledge. And our next presenter will be Ambassador Dr. June Soomer, former ambassador of St. Lucia to CARICOM and the OAS, former, sorry? OECS, sorry. Former executive
Secretary General.
Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States, which unites both the Caribbean and Latin America. And currently, she is CARICOM's representative on the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And of course, in that position and from that historical background, Dr. Soomer can certainly put today's discussion on the importance of understanding why there has to be reparations for native genocide as well as slavery in context. Dr. Soomer.
Thank you very much, Earl. Let me say thank you to the previous panelists for setting the groundwork for me and making it very easy for me to make my comments. I would like to say that when we are talking about repair, renewal, and healing towards the empowerment of the youth, that there are some very tangible things that need to be done. The first has to be that we have to remove from our language and from our history a lot of the myths that surround Indigenous people. The first one for me is that the Indigenous people were subjected to genocide because they were savage, because they were warlike, because they were not human. They found justification in enslaving Indigenous people because they said they were subhuman. And we have to remove that myth from our language and from our history. That's the first one. When you resisted colonization, you were seen as a savage. Because colonization was supposed to be there to make you civilized. And so the Indigenous people were subject to genocide because they resisted what was being done to them. And I think that youth, Indigenous youth, must take pride in the fact that their ancestors were people who resisted and who fought for what was theirs. And we have to make that very clear.
Even if they fought savagely
you
for what
remove
was
the
theirs.
savage, yes. These are not savage, these are not savages. Because if you listen to what the accounts from Christopher Columbus himself and his men, these were very gentle people. These were very gentle people. And so I think that we have to start by looking at these myths. Remove that one. And in removing that one about the savage, then you remove the one about the Kalinago being cannibals. They justified the killing of Kalinago because of their resistance by saying to the king of Spain that these people were savages and they ate human flesh, and that is why we have to kill them and enslave them. That was the justification. That was not the reality. So we have to remove that myth from our language and from our textbooks. We also have to remove from the textbooks that these Spanish men who first encountered these Indigenous women took them as wives. It was rape. It was rape, and we have to say it as it was. You know, we cannot continue to hide behind these niceties. And so when they came and they negotiated treaties and they married in their terms Indigenous women, we have to see it for what it was. You know, you enter a society and you create instability in that society through war. You created war with the Kalinago. You created war even with the Tainos, who were considered even more gentle. Not that they didn't resist, you know. And you have to look at the figures that tell you about the genocide. By the time Columbus died in 1505, 1506, they had killed more than 250,000 Tainos in Hispaniola alone. And then when you look at by 1515, in that same country, there were just about 50,000 of them left. And so you can understand how that genocide has created a kind of invisibility of the indigenous people in our countries. And the rest of them, you either, because of your desire for wealth and extraction of gold and precious minerals, you enslave them and you work them to death in these mines. And you turn around and say, okay, these people were not strong enough, so we must bring Africans for us to enslave on these plantations. So you understand that they were experimenting with our indigenous people. Not that they were not Africans here. Remember that they were Africans also. The Garifuna and the Amerindians and the indigenous people mixed. And they fought wars. They call them the Carib Wars, you know, to get their land. The same thing Chief was saying, Chief Hernandez was saying, that there must be some kind of redress in terms of how we look at land reform. I'm saying that these are some of the practical things that we can do. I would like to add that for me, one of the most practical things that we can do, as you said, because I have looked at the numbers, there are more than 35 representative statues or some kind of plaque to Christopher Columbus around the Caribbean Sea. And it is time that our leaders call for the removal of these. It is a slap in the face of indigenous people for us to continue to worship somebody we call an explorer. You know, who was nothing more than a criminal. And for us to continue to celebrate it in some countries. You know, Columbus Day and etc. So these are things that we can do within our education system. When we start looking at renewal and empowering for the young people whose ancestors were, we consider the indigenous people, to see what their ancestors fought for and what they wanted for them. One of the things that drew me as Laura was speaking with regard to medicine is the fact that they have taken a lot of our indigenous innovations, a lot of our indigenous medicines, etc., and taken it for their own, put patents on it, and the indigenous people have never benefited from these. And these are some of the things we can call for with regard to redress. So I'm saying this in my opening. I mean, I don't know if you all will come back again to me.
Yes, certainly.
But we need to then look at the language that Cozier spoke to. You know, how we use the language. And because the language continues to oppress indigenous people. And we must look at it closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soomer. There you had it from our four presenters who have given us a global, regional, and a national picture in each case. And at this point, we go into we bring our presenters back by way of questions and answers and comments. And we can also feel as participants to question each other. I'd like to start with Chief Hernandez. Chief, we have spoken a lot about Columbus, and as Dr. Soomer indicated, today is also called Columbus Day in some countries still. August 9th, International Day for Indigenous People, is also still called Columbus Day in some Caribbean and Latin American territories. About 2 years ago, I recall that in Trinidad and Tobago, on Indigenous Day, there was furor over a call for the removal of the statue of Columbus in Port of Spain. And when we say Columbus and Port of Spain, the fact that your capital is called the Port of Spain would indicate that there was a certain level of importance to the capital, and hence probably why a statue of Columbus was placed. Since then, the statue of Nelson has been pulled down in Barbados. Where are things today insofar as the Columbus statue in Port of Spain?
Yeah, Mike, Chief.
You're still on mute.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I was saying thanks for raising the issue of Columbus because I had intended to bring it up, but you made it easy for me. So to answer your question, Columbus statue is still up. The movement that been agitating for the removal had some objections from different quarters, including myself as chief of the Santa Rosa First Peoples community. There are a few other smaller groupings of indigenous peoples that have joined with that organization for the tearing down or the removal of the Columbus statue. So it is seen that I am standing in the way of that not happening, but I have an explanation. But because of what was created, the Prime Minister has appointed a committee to look at this issue of the removal of Columbus and street names and signs that are offensive and so on. But what started it all is the Columbus issue. Our position, or the Santa Rosa First Peoples community position, is that we are not saying that the Columbus statue should remain in that place of prominence, that it should not be removed. That is not what we are saying. We are saying that because of all that is associated with Columbus, all the negatives that came as a result of Columbus towards the indigenous peoples and so on, and not only the indigenous peoples, but the slave trade and everything that is negative that came as a result. Yes, that happened, and we recognize that. But my point is that when you go to move the statue of Columbus, that should not be an action in isolation. It should not be an action in isolation. So there is the big uproar that we should remove Columbus's statue because of what he stood for and what came after and followed and so on. That is fine. But given the societies that we are as Caribbean peoples, and I speak for Trinidad, this will be done, and that will be the end of that. Here is an opportunity by removing the Columbus statue to advance the cause of the indigenous peoples and by extension, people who were affected as a result of Columbus. So I'm saying it should not be an action in isolation. Together with the removal should be some action that will advance the cause of the indigenous peoples and the peoples who were affected by Columbus. If that doesn't happen, the Columbus statue will be removed, and that will be the end of that. And because again of what Columbus stood for and what happened following him, I think it is so important that we have some action to advance the cause of the peoples. And that is our position. I don't know if I am clear with it.
No, I think you've been loud and clear. One second question. I'm sure there will be questions about that, but another question relating to Trinidad.
Yeah, but I still, a little bit still on Columbus. So for example, you're going to remove Columbus. They are not saying that space that is now known as Columbus Square, advance what it will be renamed, what it will be called, or what it will be used for, and things like that. That is important. That is important. I just lost my train of thought there. Yes, what sort of education system that you're going to put forth to educate the population on Columbus and why the removal of Columbus. All these things are very important for the peoples because a lot of people don't even know the contribution of Columbus in terms of the demise of the indigenous peoples. So there must be added things to the removal. what about the name of Trinidad? You know, you're against Columbus and what he stood for, but every time you call the name Trinidad, you're calling Columbus. Because, and as the chair, the coordinator just said, Port of Spain. We are not a Port of Spain. We used to be. So every time you call these names, you're calling Columbus. For me, I am saying Columbus every time I say Trinidad or Port of Spain. What is the long term? What are we going to do to correct this situation? So that is our position on Columbus.
Yes, while we're still in Trinidad, and it is going to come over to St. Lucia as well, I remember telling you about the fact that the bones of our first people continue turning up near our beaches. And your memorable response to me was, they are speaking to us. Tell us a little bit more about what we should be seeing when we see what we declare as bones and skeletons being discovered in these construction sites. And I say Trinidad because I clearly, distinctly remember that recently some bones and remains of indigenous people, first people, were found nowhere else but at the site of the Red House, the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament.
Yes.
So can you share with us how you think we should be, particularly in those territories like St. Lucia, where we do not have a history of concentrating on our first people?
Yeah. Well, we know for a fact that where the Red House is located, that area there was an Amerindian village on the banks of the St. Anne's River, so that it was no surprise to find the remains of the ancestors in their skeletons and in their pottery and other artifacts that they would have used there at that burial site. So we keep saying that the parliament, the lawmakers, the legislators are sitting and legislating on the cemetery, in a cemetery, on the remains of our ancestors. And that alone warrants some form of respect, some form of acknowledgement. So that we have begun seeing now that in the opening of the parliament, for example, which never happened before, that members of the community are called to be part of the ceremonial opening and to offer oblations and prayers. So that is a good sign there. But we were also successful in getting the government of the time to adhere to our request for the reburial of the bones. Because the bones and skeletons of any people, or most people I should say, not only indigenous peoples, are sacred to them and their cultures. Nobody wants the remains of their father or their mother or their loved one to be exposed in a glass case for people to come and look at it and so on. So we understand the need for science and for research and so on. So while it is good that that they can study these bones with the scientific data and so on to date it properly and so on, that is good. But after all that is done, we requested that it be reburial with the traditional and ceremonial rites of the first peoples. And we had our request acceded to, and it was properly reburied on the site of the Red House. And, we had all the different indigenous rituals and so on, again with people across the region, shamans and so from across the region doing the religious rites and so on. And there is a mark, and we have asked for a monument to be erected on that spot as a remembrance and as a symbol of the first peoples who first occupied that area. So that we had made some progress. At first, when it was discovered, it was a kind of secret, but it was leaked. And I guess the spirits of the ancestors allowed it to be leaked so that the whole country knew about it and it could not be shielded or covered up anymore. And, it gave us an opportunity to request the proper reburial, as I said, of these remains of the first peoples. So we were successful in that. And I say that, the ancestors, they cannot come to us in person, as we are doing now, but through their remains, they speak to us. And when they speak to us, there should be those who are wise in the respective communities to know how to proceed in dealing with these remains.
In which case, I would come back to St. Lucia to Jomo. Jomo is will be remembered for having assisted in taking the voice of the ancestors to the people following the discovery of remains at Cabot. For those of you viewing abroad, Cabot is a development in the extreme north of the island in the Cap Estate area, where a golf course has been constructed, and during the construction period remains turned up. And of course, like in the case of Trinidad, it was secret at the beginning, but the word got out and quite a lot happened. What would you say, Jomo, came out of that, I wouldn't say that discovery, but that revelation of the continued turning up of indigenous remains in different parts of St. Lucia?
There is no legislation on this wise. So bones are turning up everywhere, especially on the coastline. I've seen it myself. I've seen them surfacing, sacred spaces. People drive their vehicles into it, crush the bones, expose them. Golf courses have been built in these areas. And even when you discover them and then you bring it to light, it appears that we take that very light.
We take it lightly.
We take it lightly, and we don't, there is no action. We discovered bones that were protruding, we cordoned it off. We went to the police, we were asked to report it to the police, because anytime you see bones, you have to report it to the police by law. We did what we were supposed to do, brought in the police. They said they would have helped us cordon it off with the tips and so forth. They never did. So we did our own thing, and we put sticks to prevent vehicles from running over them. And the bones were literally protruding. Then we went back a few weeks after, and the bones were gone.
Yes.
Somebody dug them up.
I didn't want them to be involved.
Somebody dug them up. And the Archaeological and Historical Society knew about it. The National Trust knew about it. And nothing happened. Nothing happened to protect that area as a sacred area. The institutions are supposed to be guarding and spearheading that action, slept on the job.
In which,
and we lost the bones. When we came back, the bones were gone.
Have disappeared.
They have disappeared. They've disappeared. Dogs ain't go with them old bones, you know. So it's some human that came out.
So this is up to today in 9th of August 2023. This is the situation.
Yes, in Casaba.
That the bones, that there were all those demonstrations and so on about. Nobody knows where they are?
Nobody knows where they are.
Okay, so that's a case. That's a case to be followed up on. I would like us to move to Dominica, to Minister Frederick, from the standpoint that, Mr. Minister, what we've been hearing are the complaints from Trinidad and St. Lucia, where the authorities have not been doing enough to satisfy the needs for ensuring that there is the level of respect for the legacy of our first people. But Dominica has, for a longest period of time, been in the forefront of showing that something not only can be done, but things need to be done. I do know from my work as a journalist that In Dominica, you don't necessarily have to be digging up bones. Just recently, an entire settlement was exposed. Tell us a little bit more about what your government, what is your government's approach to setting the example for other CARICOM governments to come on board with Waitikubuli and the Kalinago people's movement to see the struggle beyond the context of Caribs and Arawaks, but within the context of First People and Indigenous, the importance of their legacy.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. I want to start off by saying I was afforded the opportunity to have a tertiary education at university level on the premise that I should make a contribution to the community, and also because the community lacked certain capacities. And so I was very happy to come back into the community to do the work that has to be done in enlightening and bringing to the fore the importance of our heritage. So at UWI, I studied political science and history, and I felt compelled, based on the work done by my predecessors, parliamentarians, and also close relatives of mine who were actually Kalinago chief and members of the council. And one of the only reasons I will say honestly to this panel and to the listening public is that one of the only reasons I went into active politics is based on the fact that I have seen visible movements of the government to shed light on the importance of the indigenous people and to add a value to what they have contributed over time. And so if I felt that at any one time that the government wasn't doing enough, I would have participated in this entire process. So I'm committed to that cause because there's clear evidence across the land space that considerations are given to the importance of our rights and our privileges that we should share under the UN DRIPS. But I would also argue that there's so much more that needs to be done. And I just want to backtrack a little bit to what Chief Hernandez said regarding Columbus Day. I agree with you, Chief, that it is not merely a point to remove a statue. It has to be deeper than that. It has to be really, really deep, and it is a shift of consciousness, I believe, that has to happen. And so what we did in a very small way in Dominica, in 2014, I assisted the then Minister, Mr. Daru, to have the name change officially in the law books. But I felt that just changing Carib to Kalinago, there needs to be more. And so on the heels of that name change, we installed a facility, a financial facility at a bank to ensure that people within that space have access to finance, to develop their own enterprises, to develop businesses, to educate themselves, etc. So all of this is important because
as an action,
advance
the cause of the people.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not merely just changing and breaking down, but it has to be deeper. And so Earl, we have been doing a lot on the island. We are ensuring that that the council is given, continue to have the full autonomy to do the work of the Kalinago people. And I say at the parliament, I say at the cabinet level that I am just the messenger. I am just that conduit between the tribal council, the Kalinago council, and the government. I can take no decision on behalf of the council. I get advice from the council, and because I have a seat at the cabinet and the parliament, I echo that voice. And so we've been able to deal with our education issues. Even as we speak, we have students going off to international universities. We are getting more than 20% of the folks going out. We only have 2% of the population, but we get 20% of the scholarships. That's good. We have access to all of the amenities that a modern community should have. we, for the most part, and I'm just doing the figures as we speak. Post Hurricane Maria, with a devastation of more than 95% of the housing stock in the entire country, the Carnago territory have been the area to benefit the most from government interventions. And so it appears to us that the government is really putting its money where its mouth is to ensure that the work continues and the importance of the indigenous people, Kalinago, remains sound in Dominica. I have a seat at the cabinet level. I am able to push the agenda as afforded to me by the chief and council. And during this entire process, what is so important for me as a Kalinago brave living within the community is the fact that there's always free and prior knowledge and informed consent to do activities. And so the government don't come into the community and do things. We have to have all of the necessary discussions with the councillors and the chief. And so I feel empowered by that, because I think it makes the work much easier, because we have to build our structures and systems from within. Recently, we published, and I'm really happy for the input of Dr. Soomer when she spoke about redefining and retailing and removing the myth that is attached to all of what is indigenous. We recently published two publications, 2 books for kindergarten and primary schools, and this was informed by community consultation. The elders, the teachers, students, they all came together and said that this is what we want to be told. This is what we want to tell the world about ourselves. And so we have these publications. One is a coloring book for kindergarten children, and the other is a comic book for children between the age of 7 to 12. And so what is important in the Dominican context is the fact that we know that we have suffered much, but we're making strides to ensure that we retell that story. I think that's one of the crucial points in the entire movement, where it is always easy for us to point fingers to what should be done, but yet we are not encouraging young people to be part of the movement. We are not encouraging them to take on the serious work that is necessary in terms of archaeology, history, the proper research, and we're happy that Jomo spoke about the research. And for the most part, Jomo, we are not given credit for all that wonderful work that we have given to humanity. And when you speak about the endangered knowledge, it's so crucial, it's so important. So the government is doing all of this to include every facet of Kalinago heritage into the curriculum, into all our movements. What we have done recently also in the Dominica context is to marry the Creole. Because Jomo, you spoke a few, I realize you're a fluent Creole speaker. To realize that within the Creole language itself, the patois, in Yolobaga is Kalinago. There are a lot of things that are Kalinago in there. All of the words for the plants and animals, the flora and fauna, are Kalinago words. And so the government itself, through the ministry and with the council, we are ensuring that the champions of Creole understand that a significant part of the Creole culture has an element of Kalinago in it, which cannot be discounted. And so this is sort of the joy that I really get in understanding that the government itself understands. The Prime Minister speaks to the fact that he comes from an original settlement of Kalinago, and he has Kalinago ancestry. I feel empowered because I feel I have given the opportunity to pick his mind and his thoughts on some of what we could do as relates to making the Kalinago community better. There's a lot we have to offer. As a chief, I know we need to meet and we need to discuss how we treat the Trinidad situation and how Trinidad can give a little more empowerment to the Santa Rosa community. I know you have good collaborations with Brother Manley and Mabrika and Miranda, and this is a deep cultural exchange there. I think it has to go a little further to get a little political will to shake some of the foundations of the government in Trinidad. I think I want to lead that charge and champion that with you. because it's important, like Dr. Soomer said, to highlight what we have done and get away from talking in a language that doesn't help. Because by keeping it that way, by being courteous, we are not changing anything. And so we have to say truth where it is. We have to, like Dr. Soomer said, say something what it is.
I have to jump in, Minister. We have 2 minutes left, and we have to go around the table. Let's split the last 2 minutes in 4. And can we have your closing comments in the first quarter of those last 2 minutes? While you're still on the floor.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me part of this conversation. I think we should keep at it and moving forward. I really want to thank the rest of the panel here for I feel today you just empowered me some more, knowing that sometimes it can be a lonely journey being at a leadership position to act on behalf of the people. And I'm really empowered for you, so I'm happy for the courage that you gave me. I feel so empowered to do the work that needs to be done for Dominica and for our indigenous peoples across the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
And thank you for being part of our panel today. We go around the table. We go to Jomo, then to Dr. Soomer, and we will have Mr. and Chief Hernandez will have the final word. Jomo?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the panel this evening. I want to flag something that is, to me, a little missing element there, and that is the land. Because without the land, and we need to protect the land. Because colonialism didn't just oppress the people, they destroyed the land. In fact, Columbus said in one of his blogs that there used to be what he called a feathered eclipse of the sun. Because there were so many birds flying over it, it eclipsed the sun. That's how rich our environment was. It was pillaged, taken all the resources to fatten the folks in Europe. And that's a very important point. Our land has been exploited. And even now with golf courses and with, all kinds of things happening. So we need to guard that land that gave us birth, that little territory that we are on called the Caribbean. We need to be more sensitive of the importance of land. That's a very important resource. And I want to flag that. It's very important that we guard our land space. We cherish our land. We need to feed ourselves. We need to swing cornu. Okay,
Jomo. Dr. Soomer?
Thank you very much, Earl, for having me on the panel. I want to say that I think that this kind of engagement brings the kind of visibility I want to see for Indigenous people. We have been hiding them in plain sight, and it is time for us to recognize the importance to not just our history, but to our future. And so I am one of those people who will always fight for for reparations for Indigenous people, especially for Indigenous women, who I think were doubly exploited. Thank you.
Chief Hernandez, I'd like to say that the 2 points I want to make before we close. One is that Columbus and the Europeans came with the doctrine of the doctrine of discovery that gave them the right to plunder and kill in the name of God. And secondly, that the good news from the recent summit between CELAC and the European Union was that CARICOM will now be approaching the International Court of Justice for a ruling on the call for reparations for slavery and native genocide. And since slavery was described as the greatest crime against humanity by the United Nations, I tend to also say that the native genocide was also an earlier crime against humanity. Not for the purpose of measuring and comparing, but I think if we describe native genocide also as a crime against humanity, it will help draw attention to and bring visibility, like Dr. Soomer says, to the whole issue of native genocide. You have the final word, Chief Hernandez.
Thank you so very much once again for inviting me to be part of this discussion. So much powerful and relevant contribution from the panelists. I wish I could have all of you in our gathering in October. That might not be possible, but maybe one, and as we go along, we can have the others. But in closing, I would like to say that while we look to the European countries for redress, for reparations for native genocide and so on, and African enslavement, our current governments must make the first moves, as they are the inheritors of the colonial system. So that with the simple things that our governments can do, they will be leading the way and showing the others that they are doing what is in their remit to appease and to look at redress for native genocide and the enslavement. So with these few words, I want to thank you so much, and great news, as you said, to the next move of CARICOM on reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of Africans. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Chief Hernandez, and also thank you to your assistant, Lucia Robinson, who we happen to know very well from her long history of association with struggle. Thank you, Honorable Cozier Frederick in Dominica, for taking time off in your travels to be with us this evening. Thank you, Ambassador Dr. June Soomer, for being here just after landing from an overseas assignment. And thank you to Jomo Jean-Pierre for being here with us and making the point that we need to rescue the knowledge that is endangered. On behalf of us all, on behalf of the National Television Network, on behalf of the Cultural Development Foundation, on behalf of the National Reparations Committee, I'm Earl Bousquet saying thank you for joining us, and we will be back with other discussions like this as Emancipation Month continues for a second year in St. Lucia. Thank you for viewing.